Welcome to the Landing Strip with Nick Lynham and Mikey Garcia, presented by From Financial.
Welcome back to the Top Line Winnipeg / the Landing Strip. We're doing a little bit of a mix today as we had some technical difficulties last night. So me and Mikey will be here to discuss last night's game a little bit and some of our bigger takeaways coming out of it. And then we'll dive into some bigger topics around the team, potentially trying to re-envision what this Winnipeg Jets team can be after this stretch of games. Now, 3-7 in their last 10 and haven't looked pretty doing it. Could be 2-8 if Connor Hellebuyck doesn't steal one. We're going to talk a little bit about Lambert coming up, Hanel and Stanley, and how to kind of utilize those three plus a guy like Perfetti in this re-envisioning. And we got some Four Nations updates as the rosters were built out. So we'll get into all of that. But I'm not going to do this all on my own. Mikey, how you doing tonight?
Doing pretty good. We had some technical difficulties yesterday that we got sorted out, and we're ready to rock tonight. And we've had some time to decompress after the game yesterday, so that's good too. And I'm excited to get into this and take a look at what's going on with our Jets.
Yeah, some decompression might not be a bad thing. I think I got my anger off my chest 2 games ago, so I'm feeling pretty revived and looking to find some solutions rather than just anger. Now, whether the team's interested in new solutions, that is a different conversation. But I do think we should still be having the combos of what we're seeing, what we think can be changed. And of course, this is all brought to you by our good friends over at From Financial. Don't want to forget them supporting the podcast and our experience here. So, Mikey, where should we start? What do we think? Start right at the St. Louis game? It's the most pressing conversation.
Yeah, I think that really gets into the heart of the entire discussion. So it's a good place to start.
Yeah, so yesterday, where do you want to begin on this one? Because my head goes multiple different ways when it comes to last night's game.
So last night's game felt like a real bad case of deja vu. It felt like we were watching the Jets, circa 2020-ish. It really felt like they, in a panic almost, decided to just fall back into bad habits. And it was frustrating to watch, especially considering when we've seen them play this year in a completely different manner and be successful, to then fall back into those old habits. We'll get into maybe some reasons why here, but man, it was frustrating to watch just because we've seen how good they can be and we want them to be.
And this was a big takeaway. I know Tony, who tunes in all the time, and he had made a tweet about this as well, that me and him were kind of discussing after that game over text while we were trying to sort out some of those technical difficulties, about the idea that at its core, this team does want to resort back to that version. And I don't think it's something we're going to see moving forward. I just think when you look at yesterday's game, and I think Scott Arniel saw it too, based on some of his comments after the game about being really dumbfounded about some of the stuff they were seeing and attributing that to mental mistakes. And that's where I would lean as well. I just think it was very interesting that at a time when this team is clearly toast, don't have much to give, instead of resorting to the system and trying to squeeze one out. And it's a tough system to play. And that could be playing into this as well when you're talking about a tired group, that they do resort to that fancy snake charmer, as Sean Reynolds has dubbed it, hockey team offensively, where they're trying to get too cute. They're passing up opportunities from the slot. And this is a team that we talk about pretty regularly, not even getting enough quality from the slot to begin with, never mind to be passing out of it. And it was just a hard watch because it brought back those days. And I mean, from 2019 to 2021, it wasn't very fun hockey around here during the last days of the Paul Maurice tenure and the beginning of Rick Bowness really trying to instill that new look. And part of this was like seeing it end up like that. And it is one game. Don't want to beat up too hard on it, but just seeing that visual of starting to look more and more like that version, it really does show you how much effort and time Bones, Arniel, and that staff had to put in really creating a new system and a new identity in Winnipeg. That's where kind of my head was going last night.
Yeah, at the end of the day, right, we're all human. These guys are as well. When you're tired, when you're exhausted, when you're, starting to panic a little bit, we all fall back into bad habits. So it's not to say we expect them to be perfect out there every single day, every single game, 82 games a year. It's just the fact that there's been a trend, right? We've seen this trend slowly creep in and creep in and creep in, and it really took over yesterday, and that's where the alarm bells start to kind of ring. I think you touched on it perfectly there. It's a hard system to play. This isn't a passive system that Scott Arniel and the assistant coaches have put together. This is supposed to be an aggressive forechecking, attacking in the neutral zone type of play, and that's going to wear on you both mentally and physically, especially when it's all road games. You're traveling every day. You're not sleeping in your own bed. So I can understand how you get to this point. I just hope it doesn't become a consistent trend going forward, right? It's happened. We still have 2 more road games coming up before the long home stretch. But at that point, really hoping to see either some change in the play or some change in the lineups, just something to get them out of this funk. And we'll get into why here, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to touch on that schedule. I mean, if you're familiar with me, I hate going to the whole schedule and time zones thing, and I hate leaning on that. So I'll preface this with, we can't just put what we're seeing in the last 10-game stretch on the schedule, but I do want to highlight it as I thought yesterday's game was probably the most obvious example of a team that was clearly toast, clearly had nothing to give. Yep. And it was probably the worst game in Winnipeg we've seen in years. I mean, I couldn't make it last minute because of my dog here, and it felt good to not be in the ring for that one. So, hey, it might have been a little W for me. But on this schedule, I mean, it's been 11 road games with 2 single home game stops in between. So 13 games total leading into this weekend still in 25 days. And that's with a 3 and 4 coming up here to finish that stretch off. That's not easy. So I do want to highlight that. And I do think it's fair to discuss that when talking about some of the results we're seeing with this team. But the other half of it too, it is still early in this year and they're going to have to find their legs. I mean, because of the Four Nations tournament, we're seeing a lot of teams playing virtually every second day. And I do think the grind we just saw is among the tougher ones we'll probably see. Yep. But different teams are going to kind of have to go through this at different times this year because of that Four Nations tournament. And I do think there is still pressing issues that we were seeing creep in before the gauntlet itself.
Exactly. We were seeing a lot of these small things start even when the winning streak was still going on. And we were pointing out, hey, just as a heads up, things are going well. The power play is carrying them. This is great. But these 5-on-5 numbers aren't sustainable if you want to have a long playoff run. We need to make sure we're keeping an eye on this. Hey, we keep pointing out these little things, even when the winning streak was happening. It's the fact that they were never really addressed. And now they've become even bigger problems, as we've gone on to a big losing streak now. So it's a combination of things, right? It's not just the schedule. If they were playing the game that we expect, kind of out of them where they are successful every game, but they were still getting beat on certain nights just because they're tired, they're gassed, they're traveled, that's a totally different conversation to have than what we've seen where even, Scott Arniel mentioned in his comments, where did that come from? Where did what are we doing out there? So that I think is the more pressing issue, not so much that it that it happened. It's the way that it happened.
For sure, and it's not like we were gonna go as much fun as we were having, joking around. It's not like the Winnipeg Jets were gonna go 80-1 or whatever, and the 14-1 start was hot. But it's some of the stuff that's creeping in that you start to work on, and I wish I'd been compiling a bunch of numbers on lines and stuff. I wish I would have done a raw look at the Winnipeg Jets. But just at a glance, by Corsi, which is just shot attempts, They're currently in 20th in the league, which, I mean, at this point, it's a concern. By just raw expected goals, and I know the Jets, especially early on in this year, had a ton of leads. Yep. So that would play into the score effects here. But by raw expected goals so far this year, they're 24th, and both numbers have sagged under 50%. So definitely not ideal. So what do we think's kind of playing into it, and what do we want to see kind of change? Where are some of the things that stand out for you when it comes to the Winnipeg Jets and why they're arriving at these results right now?
Unfortunately, I think it all falls on the shoulders of the first line.
And I'll add the top pair there too. I'm just going to add that in.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially with the Jets system, right? A lot of the offense is supposed to be coming through the defense up at the blue line. That top pair isn't getting it done, and the first line isn't getting it done. I think that's really the issue at the moment. They're getting caved in offensively, and you can't have that. We talked about it briefly yesterday. Your two skill lines, the ones that are supposed to be responsible for your offense, are at a net negative right now for their adjusted Corsi. So like they're being outshot, they're being outplayed, and you can't have that 5-on-5. It's a different story on the power play. It's a different story when they go 6-on-5. But right now, 5-on-5, they're just not getting nearly enough volume of good offense from that first line and the top pair.
Yeah, so it's interesting here. We had kind of talked, or we have been talking, and if you've listened to my podcast or you've seen my takes on social media, I've long been a denier that this top line is going to work. And what's interesting about this last 10-game stretch is they're putting up the same numbers you would normally see from them over the last 2 years. So I want to really open people's minds as to what's going on there, as far as the Adam Lowry line has been the line for the Winnipeg Jets that's outscored their opposition at such a level that's allowed the Mark Scheifele line to come in at even or just under even, right? It has kind of been what's been going on there, is that Lowry line has been the identity of this team. They've driven things the right way, which has kind of given the coaching staff more time to hope that this line becomes the elite first line they think it is. But if we start looking at the last 10 games here, and it's kind of gotten under the radar because they have been so good for this team over the last few years. They are the best line most consistently for this team, is the Adam Lowry line is not dominating their minutes near as much as they have been. And then that plays into the first line conversation. So I want to tie those two ideas together here. Let's look at the Adam Lowry line quickly. Mm-hmm. Over their last 10 games, obviously the team's 3-7 during that stretch. They're out shooting their opposition 104-100, so 51%. That's a line we've seen run margins upwards of 56-58% at their peak. They're currently outscoring their opposition 4-3 in those minutes. Mm-hmm. For 57%, obviously outscoring your opponents in a 10-game segment is good, but we're not seeing them really, that domination we're used to from them. As far as that, you look at the expected goals, they're under 50% in that 10 games at 48.9. And this is the one that kind of stood out for me. And I know it's not necessarily a stat that's predictive in value, but it's something I like to look at when we're looking at the Winnipeg Jets and honestly any team for that matter, is who's winning the high danger shot attempts battle. Just because we know, especially with a line like that, who is not the most gifted of scorers, but they're going to bang home those garbage goals. That line, surprisingly, too, in the last 10 games, I guess not surprisingly watching it, they haven't popped off the page as much. Yep. They're losing the high danger shot attempts level. So now with the Adam Lowry line looking, let's call it normal, or looking not invincible.
More like a third line.
It really, looking like a third line rather than an elite third line, let's say, right? Because those are still fine numbers for what a third line is going to do, but it's not what we're used to seeing out of them at all. So what it's done is it's really put that spotlight on the skill groups. We talked last week about how the Ehlers, Perfetti, Nemestikov line has been the worst line in the NHL that's played over 200 minutes.
Yep. And
that we needed some kind of change. What's fascinating is we're finally seeing some conversation around the market on the 81, 55, 13 line. And it's funny to me because I've done the breakdown here of what they've looked like as a group versus what they're doing. Over their last 10 games, the 81, 55, 13 line is marginally losing the shot attempts battle, 114 and 109 for 48.8%. Their goals are 4-4, so 50-50. And their expected goals are 47.64%. And they're actually winning the high danger shot attempts by 16-15. So that line is still the middle of the road, 50-50 line that might give you an extra goal, might cost you multiple goals. Like, it's what we've come to expect of that line. It's really no different than what we've seen from a Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor-led line in the post-Bonus era. Over the last 3 years, since Rick Bowness came in, Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor as a line are running at a 48.9 Corsi for percentage. So right in line with what we've seen over the last 10 games.
Yep.
They're losing the goals battle 83-81. So by 2, and that's the type of line that could put up a 2-goal night, no problem if they're on. And they're running a 47% expected goals over the last 3 years. High danger areas, 48%. So what we've seen from that line over the last 10 games is really a microcosm of what we've been talking about the last 3 years as far as that line not giving enough to carry a group forward, but we're not seeing the depth now carry them and kind of hide them. So I do find the narrative interesting when that line is, and obviously the goals have dried up, so you get a little bit more heightened looks when the goals have dried up. I mean, Kyle Connor hasn't scored a goal in, 6 games?
6 games.
Gabe Velarde hasn't scored a goal in 5 or 6, and Mark Scheifele scored his first in 6 last night. Yep. So obviously that comes into play, and you start getting more pressure once those goals aren't coming. But that line is giving you what you should be expecting from them, and maybe it's time to open the collective eyes to that reality that when the Winnipeg Jets depth, which has kind of been their strength, is having better depth players than other teams, aren't providing an advantage, you see that the top groups, especially the top line in Winnipeg that's been given almost 600 minutes in the last 2 years to work, is just not enough to take that final step forward.
Yeah, they need more from that first line. I think with the Lowry line, there's 2 things kind of at play. The obvious one being, like, they're gassed, right? They play a hard style that's in a hard system. They've been going all out, and they carried the team, for quite a long stretch there at the beginning of the year. And the other part of it is teams are adjusting, right? They're looking at that line and playing them as a second line. They're getting those type of matchups, especially on the road, because there's no reason to really be afraid of the third line, especially with Ehlers gone. So there's been adjustments on the other side, and there's only so much that they can do being the only line going some nights. You need more from that first line, and it doesn't work. They're playing the way that they play. That is, they are who we thought they are. That's what's going on here. They're a sub Corsi 50% line. That's just the way it's going to be as long as they're playing together. I think the eyes that need to be open to that are the ones making the lineup decisions, because it doesn't quite work with them as a pairing right now, and we need to see a different look.
And here's where I go with it, because right before I got on, I had seen Winnipeg Sports Talk had tweeted out a clip with Murat kind of talking about the top line, and the Winnipeg Jets will become a threat again when Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele are scoring. And obviously they're not going to go goalless the rest of the year. I still expect Kyle Connor to be a 40-plus scorer, yep. Mark Scheifele to score 30-plus. I mean, these are key pieces to the Winnipeg Jets, and there's still a long road to go. But I am going to push back on the idea that they're going to be a threat when that happens, because we're seeing that line still produce like they normally would, and the goals just aren't going in. And I think it's one thing to say you're a threat, and they're going to be a threat to win hockey games more frequently.
Yep.
But it's still not a line that I look at and say, hey, once they start scoring again And most of that, I mean, it's 50-50 at 5-on-5, but they're adding some on the power play. I still don't see this team as a real threat when they've locked themselves into this formula. This formula, as I kind of ranted about a couple of days ago, is the problem. And we've only seen them try this formula now for multiple years, despite there being, like, there's real talent on this team that you could do stuff with. But they've locked themselves into that situation. And if there was ever a time to finally reinvent yourself when you've got absolutely nothing going for you, it's right now.
Yeah. This is the best opportunity to do it. They're at their lowest point after being at their highest point. You have every license right now to go and make some interesting lineup decisions because they have a lot of talent. They've got different ways that they could be applying it. I'm just really hoping that we get to see it because they need it right now. You know how you know that it won't work as a long-term solution for the Jets to be successful in the playoffs? Because we've done it for multiple years and it hasn't worked, right? If they were good enough as a group to play, slightly below, but still find ways to come out on top, we'd be a lot farther in the playoffs and there may be a banner hanging up right now. But unfortunately, that's not the case. I just feel like we've seen what they look like together. It's fine, but it's not going to win you, a Stanley Cup. And, maybe there is a combination that would be better.
And that's the thing, like, they're both such key pieces to this. Like, if you just look at how the roster is built, Mark Scheifele is clearly the most valuable player or forward in Winnipeg, just because if you lose him, look at the center depth. Kyle Connor's been their most valuable forward to this point in the season, this very year. And they could both still be valuable without playing together at 5-on-5, and at some point, this org has to arrive there, man. It's been going on 7 years where it hasn't gotten them over. They haven't been anything more than a below average first line. Yep. And we're kind of back to trying the rotation of guys through. Like we saw Vlad there yesterday. We saw Velarde back in the third. At some point, and we'll get into some of our ideas. There's some ways you could play with this lineup, and there's some new ideas I want to talk about. But at some point, that's where it's got to start. If you're re-envisioning the Winnipeg Jets as a whole, you start at the top. And we're going to talk about the deep pairings here in a second, because the top of those need some help right now as well. As much as we'll have conversations about Logan Stanley, about Cole Perfetti, about Brad Lambert, about the fourth line excelling and creating a role, wins are over the course of the year going to come from your top guys. And until the Winnipeg Jets re-envision what the top of their lineup can look like, they're spinning tires as far as I see it.
Yeah, it's time. There are a lot of complicated things in life. Unfortunately, this really isn't one of those things. The eye test will tell you it. The numbers all show it. They don't have to be deep analytics, but those also show it. But just on the surface, are they getting scored on? It's all very shots on goal. Like, it's all very simple, and everything is telling you that it's just not quite good enough if you want to be in that upper echelon, which we believe the Winnipeg Jets could be.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, right? Is that this isn't going to cost them from a playoff spot. This isn't going to be a make or break on this team being good or bad. But it does make or break how much of a ceiling this team has when you're getting a 50-50 effort out of a top group. You just need so much more down the rest of the lineup. And the exciting part, and I get why I don't get why people focus on the negative as much. When I see this conversation, it excites me at the idea that a Mark Scheifele can excel on a line and a Kyle Connor could potentially excel on a line by themselves, because all of a sudden you have two lines that should be dangerous night in, night out, and you're not as dependent on the one going when you know the one still is below average, even if it's been better than last year this year.
Yeah, why not give yourself more tickets in the lottery, right? It's one thing where if you're in a late, deep playoff game It's late, you're in an overtime, you load up your top line. Yeah, absolutely. I'm all for that type of stuff. But over the course of a long season, over the course of a full game, why not give yourself that opportunity to spread out some of the talent, give yourself those extra lottery tickets, and keep taking, it just feels like it makes so much more sense when you have a lot of talent, which the Winnipeg Jets currently do. They have enough NHL bona fide players. They have enough young players on cheap deals. They have a good mix where they can go out and add at the deadline. They're going to be able to be a player. Why not give yourself that flexibility, try different things out, especially early on when you built up a lead of points? This is the time where they should have been, you start losing a couple games, try out a few different pairings, try out a few different lines. This is your opportunity to see what's going to work come April. And it just feels like we squandered it by rolling out the same top line over and over and over again when it just wasn't getting the job done.
Yep, and if there was ever a time, December's a great spot to do it.
Yep.
But you brought up the idea of potentially trying new pairs, and I do think the Winnipeg Jets are due for exactly that. I mean, I just look at the results of late, and we talked about the forwards not being good enough. We really focused that conversation on the Lowry line of late, the last 10 games, and the first line, while kind of just putting out there that the second line has been so bad. Mm-hmm. The D has been a problem. Most notably, Dylan DeMello. Him and Morrissey over the last 10 games, using the same 10-game segment, getting outshot attempted 143 to 122, getting outscored 6-3. Expected goals are 40.9%, and they're getting beat in the high danger shot attempts area 29 to 21. And it's one of those things we've mentioned consistently. Like, is Dylan DeMello going to get out of this funk? We need the best out of Josh Morrissey. He's our guy. And then I watched last night's game, and it was kind of horrifying for me when it came to trying to find some belief in my boy DeMello. I mean, this is a guy I've been high on for years. This is a guy I was pumped when Paul Maurice talked about him being coach's porn and just being a quality defensive defenseman. Right now, he looks lost. And, there was just some plays last night. There was one where he, tries to pass it back to the Blues thinking it's an offside, and the play continues in the first period, and he's, confused talking to the ref. The reason it's not an offside, his own teammate passes it back over the blue line to him, so the other team doesn't have to clear. The Jets brought it back in. Yeah. So to not understand that and make a boneheaded play was what the hell, man? Then he went full NBA center, jumping up right in front of Connor Hellebuck to hand a puck down to Matthew Joseph for that great look back door. Didn't understand that. We're seeing him get caught up the ice in transition. And this is a guy I feel like if you were to send a message on D to a vet, the scratch bomb should probably go to Dylan DeMello right now. As far as sending a message, I think the first way to go with a guy that we know has been long established, this is a guy, like I said, that I've been pretty high on in past years. I think the best way to handle someone like that, we know he's a leader in the room, would be to give him the breather and put him on that third pair for a bit and try and get someone beside Morrissey for just a stretch to try and find his game. What are you seeing out of DeMello? What do you think should be the answer on where that goes over the next little bit?
Yeah, it's been real hard to watch him struggle out there because, again, like the rest of the team, we know how good he is. We've watched it over and over again for the last few years here in Winnipeg. Playing on that top pairing is really exposing whatever it is that he's dealing with, whether it's a physical ailment that we haven't been made aware of, whether it's something mentally, whatever it is. There's just something off with his game and his ability to produce, and it's really evident when he's playing on the top pairing, getting those hard minutes every night. Yeah, you don't have to, he doesn't have to sit out a game, but there's no reason why you can't give him a breather by playing him on third pairing, giving him some easier matchups for, a few nights, some less minutes, especially when you had, Colin Miller, who started off the year playing fine. There would have been no reason why you couldn't have slid him up there with Morrissey. We've seen Morrissey carry Pionk around before. He can do it again. There were ways that they could have played with things that, but instead we've seen, Miller sit, Heinele sit, Coughlin sit. it's real strange to me that they'll that DeMello keeps getting put out there in that top pairing. Not even from I'm mad that he's playing. I feel bad for him, to be honest. He's struggling and he's doing his best. It's not like he's lazy out there. We're not watching him, go for a leisurely skate. He's trying. He's getting caught. He's making bad calls. And it's real tough. I wish they would give him a bit of a breather by some reduced minutes. And find a different partner for Morrissey just for a bit to see if we can just get some traction on that top pairing.
Yeah, a few things. I tend to agree with a lot of what you just said there. And I do think for the sake of Dylan DeMello, getting him into softer minutes right now is important, but also it's really important that the Winnipeg Jets get as much as possible out of Josh Morrissey's minutes. And right now it's not going to come with this version of Dylan DeMello beside him. I will say the one exciting thing, and it's not exciting in the moment, but the one thing that I think is going to be a lot of fun in the fan base when he returns is just how much on the same page everyone will be about how valuable Dylan Samberg is to the Winnipeg Jets. And I know me and you have had this convo a couple times on the landing strip, but this stretch has really told me exactly how much this team needs Dylan Samberg right now and just how much he brings to this team defensively. A guy whose agent probably has to be pretty happy with this stretch heading into a contract year. Obviously, the big conversation coming into the year, Dylan Samberg had been such an elite defensive third pairing. Could he be better or match the value of Brendan Dillon? And through his first 20-something games as a top four in the NHL, crushed it with flying colors to the point I think we could be talking about a light version. I'm not saying he's peaking at these guys, but a light version of guys like Jacob Slavin or Pellich in New York, where it's just consistently a guy you could trust out there in the highest leverage minutes. He's going to be there defensively. I know the puck skills maybe aren't necessarily as good as some of those guys, but what he's meant for this team, it's obvious right now, and we're seeing it in the difference in Neil Pionk, where obviously the conversation has ramped up again about with his hot start, the Winnipeg Jets should be rushing to extend him. I saw Jason Bukala and the Kenny and Rennie show really hammering that home, and I'm here to push back on it. And that won't surprise you, will it, Mikey?
No, not at all. And nor should it surprise anybody, because look at how Pionk's played with Samberg and without Samberg. Pionk was going to get paid because of Dylan Samberg. The thing that's going to keep him from getting as much of a contract in Winnipeg is if Samberg's out longer term than what we're expecting. He was absolutely making Neil Pionk, because Pionk could go out and get those counting stats by skating up and having Samberg just be a fucking net that covers everything behind him. It's it's pretty incredible the progression that Dylan Samberg has shown this season, and I think Slavin Light is like a really good comparison, to be honest. So Pionk, his agent has to be screaming right now for Samberg to get healthy. I'm sure he's sending a whole bunch of extra therapists out to get him healed up.
I'll push back just slightly on the Neil Pionk paid part of it, because this is still a guy with 5 points in his last 5 games, and we know when it comes to defenders and offensive players, minutes and point totals tends to parlay into contract stability. Let's put it that way. And so he's still getting those. But if you just break down Neil Pionk with Samberg versus Neil Pionk without, it tells quite the stark story that really paints what you're saying true here. With Samberg, Neil Pionk in the second pair has been at 54.21 shot attempts advantage or percentage, Corsi for percentage. They've outscored their opposition 18-14, and that's while running a 55% expected goals and also a 55% margin in the high danger areas, which is excellent. We've talked about it. They've been the biggest surprise for me. Second pair was my biggest concern coming into the year. It has now become the strength of the decor so far. Though, without Dylan Samberg, those numbers sure take a screeching halt. Without Samberg, Neil Pionk at 5-5 is sitting at 41.8% Corsi, getting outshot 167 to 120, riding a 38.11 expected goals, quite the drop from 55. The goals are still even at 6-6, and the high danger chances go the other way, 33 to 21, good for 39%. That's quite the drop-off at 5-on-5 for the Winnipeg Jets second pair without Dylan Samberg.
Yeah, at a spot where they were already struggling at 5-on-5, they've now have another spot where they are also struggling 5-on-5. It's just, we touched on the high danger chances, maybe not being super indicative for wins and things like that, but it does tell a story on play style, right? The Jets are not going to the dirty areas in front of the net, whether it's their own area or the opposing area. And it shows. That's why they're getting outchanced in those high danger, close to the net spots, pretty much across the board. And they, in a style that the coaching staff wants them to play in, you can't do that. You can't be giving up way more in those areas than what you're getting and come out with the win. It's just not going to be consistently possible. That's why when you look at that stretch with Samberg, especially during that winning streak, that they're getting to those areas and Samberg is clearing them out of their own. That's why they're able to have that huge advantage, and they need to get back to that, with or without Dylan Samberg, but with is better.
Yeah, and if we start looking at some of the positives, Arniel, I said he expects Samberg only to be 4 weeks, which was a nice surprise. I know we were kind of assuming 6, potentially 8 weeks with a broken foot.
Yep.
So that was some good news with Dylan Samberg. The other thing that I've started to talk to some people about that I really like about how the Jets are kind of configured on the left side here, with Samberg actually showing he could be that level of guy and having Josh Morrissey at $6.25 million. The one exciting thing as we talk about Samberg's agent and whatnot, though he's had a hot start with the goals, typically speaking, both up front and defensively strong players have kind of been undervalued in the cap era. Points and minutes tend to get the big bucks, right? So I am wondering if Samberg becomes that quietly underrated player in Winnipeg, that Chevy's going to be able to extend on a deal that sees the Winnipeg Jets running a left side of Morrissey and Samberg for the rest of Morrissey's contract, somewhere in the $10 million range combined. What do you think there?
Yeah, that would give you the flexibility to really make some plays and make a push for multiple runs to go deep. That's exactly what you need. You need to find that combination where you can come in, quote unquote, under budget, especially if we're going to get some raises in the cap percentages overall for the next couple years. That's exactly what they need. They need to, maximize that and find, because if he can be there and you get that at, for the, because it's this year, right? That he's up. That's that's their opportunity.
Yeah, it is this coming summer that he was owed a new deal. I'm also going to pitch another idea here that I think that Samberg's development allows you to potentially do. We know this team's needed a top-end right-handed defenseman for some time.
Yep.
We also know that that's one of the hardest assets in the NHL to acquire. I'm starting to look at the defense, and I'm starting to wonder, and of course, like the name that really had me thinking about this was like the Owen Power thing from Merrick. Mm-hmm. If the Winnipeg Jets were able to acquire another prime age left-handed D that's legit, all of a sudden you might be looking at building the D course similar to how the Tampa Bay Lightning did for their cup runs. Now, obviously, Winnipeg's forward talent doesn't come near that group, but it allows them potentially to not hit on the right-handed D. Like we're all hoping Salmonson's going to be that guy on the right side, and maybe having 3 legitimate, really good left-handed D helps that kind of development. You got DeMello locked in, so maybe you're only looking for one fit on the right side at that point. What do you think about potentially going all in on the left side of the D course, similar to the Tampa Bay Lightning?
I don't hate it, especially over, it's a long season now, right? It's 82 games. They've got extra tournaments that pop up in between. You need 3 good pairs just overall to make it through somewhat sort of healthy when you get to the playoffs. And it lets you, take kind of later shots on the right side when you're drafting or when you're making trades. You don't have to be trying to hit a home run every single time, and you can kind of work with that. As long as you've got some, as long as one of those three left-handed guys is somebody that in a pinch in a late playoff game, if you want to load up, is still comfortable, playing on their offside, which we've seen more and more guys are willing to do and are pretty good at it now. So I definitely don't hate it. I've always been a proponent of spread it out. If you've got the option to go three deep on the left side, and let them bring up younger guys in a slower fashion and let them play with a solid partner. And that means, a couple extra less minutes on each pairing. To me, that's smart.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, too, that throughout the course of a year, you could throw a Morrissey onto his right side beside a Samberg and see if that's going to be something you can go to in the playoffs kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, you still have the options to use all three lefties within your top four, but you can also manage minutes like you're talking about over the full year. And it's just the idea that Josh Morrissey and Dylan Samberg probably both are going to come under the rate you'd expect to pay players like that it kind of does give you some options to maybe reinvent the decor in a different way. Let's keep the talk on the decor before we go and reinvent the Winnipeg Jets as we know them. Interesting week around the third pair. So not only are we having some troubles with the top four, it's clear that they're trying to figure out what their third pair is going to be. And crazily, of that third pair, it seems clear that Logan Stanley is the number 5 and locked in.
Yep.
What are you seeing? Yeah, what are you seeing with the third pair? What's your thoughts on the current situation the Jets find themselves in there? Where do you see this going?
Yeah, come hell or high water, apparently Logan Stanley is the third left defenseman. That is just it. It's over. That is cemented as his spot. And he's not going to get any better sitting in the press box. So anyways, yeah, they were auditioning a rotating crew beside him in that game there. I actually don't hate the idea of Ville Heinola playing on the right-hand side if it's going to get him into games, if Stanley is going to be forced into that spot. You know what I mean? They had some rough shifts together at the beginning of that game, but they've never played together. Heinola hasn't played on his right-handed side since playing with the Moose last year for a handful of games. So anybody's going to take some time to get used to that. But I don't hate Heinola on the right-hand side. It gives you an extra option there. Do I want Stanley on that spot? No, I don't think he's earned it. I don't think his play up to this point validates him being locked in there. But if he is, then yeah, I think we just kind of have to rotate through and see if we can find a pairing that's going to work, whether that be Heinola, whether that be Miller, whether that be whoever.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the landing strip after what was it, game 25, I think you got to hear my real thoughts on the organization and Logan Stanley. So I'm not going to go down that path again. You can only beat a dead horse so long. It's clear that Scott Arniel or the organization, because it was a little, as much as that quote pissed me off, it's also not the most endearing quote about a player.
Yeah.
Like when you think about it. We got to keep him in the top 6. He's not going to get any better in the press box. Like, it's kind of saying that he clearly needs to improve as well, in a way.
Yeah. We said it during the show.
Yeah.
It was a coach protecting his player, right? That's a coach who's not going to go and throw a young guy under the bus. That's his job. He's going to, protect him in the media. It was just, it hit the ears in a real painful way after watching that disaster of a performance and then seeing a guy in Ville Heinola who is sitting in the press box who could be made better by getting those minutes. But no, it definitely wasn't a ringing endorsement by any stretch.
And it's clear he wants the size aspect back there based on some of his comments this week. And here's my problem with it. I do think the Winnipeg Jets could obviously use some size on their back end, specifically size that can move the puck. I mean, it's been the one thing I've said has been the top priority all year.
Yeah.
It's the idea, and I almost, in a sense, feel bad for Logan Stanley, the person, because I've talked about this over the years. I believe Logan Stanley is miscast as to what the org wants him to be, and that's clearly this big, bruising, tough defenseman. His skill set has always been at its best from the offensive blue line north, and like being able to drive down and get a shot or finding shots through. It's never been in space. It's never been net front. It's never been moving the puck, though he can do it if he has time and space. It's an area that he's okay in. It's the idea that he's locked into a spot because of his size when he's not providing the elements you'd want from size. That looks like a clear miss to me. It's the idea of now Colin Miller is in a press box rotation. I mean, it's not like Colin Miller was at the top of his game before ending up in the press box. So I don't mind a one and done there, but now we've seen it 2 games in a row in front of Logan Stanley. And the other side of it is on the Hanela stuff. I'd rather him get comfortable on his left side. Let him have a stretch in the NHL where he could prove he's an NHL D-man. And if you got to move him over from there, go ahead. But it just feels like you're moving square pegs and trying to shove them in round holes to make a 26-and-a-half-year-old that's never shown that bone in his body become that. And I thought Murat had summed this up nicely on Twitter. Brad Lambert is closer to Ville Heinola in age than Heinola is to Logan Stanley. Like, just think about that as far as how we value prospects and whatnot. I just think it's a waste of time to keep going there. Heinola might not be it, and I think we've seen some up and downs in his game to date. Again, we're not going to know until you give this guy a run. And we know Stanley is not it. He's, I believe it's the fourth worst penalty differential in the NHL over the last 2 years.
First.
I think Garrett updated that today,
well, it may have been, but like at the end of that game, it was first. He was second going in, and then it was the game before the three penalties. He ended up at number 1 after that game.
Okay, so the fourth is since he entered the league.
There you go.
So the idea is that he's going to be big, physical, and kill penalties for you, but he's putting you shorthanded, which is costing you goals more often than not. Yep. Not more often than not, but more often than it would with, say, an average third-pairing defenseman. And again, you still have upside to figure out with Heinola, who I still believe will be a trade piece this year. And that's the other side of it. Guess what? He's going to be worth more if he's able to put together a successful stint in the NHL than if he is in the press box. So I do think this is a conversation we'll be talking about all year. At the end of the day, a number 6 defenseman isn't a make or break point on a Stanley Cup roster. It just further shows, and this is where it bothers me the most, how much and how far pigeonholed the Winnipeg Jets org has gotten within a set formula as to what they think will be successful compared to what they can unlock. So you know what? Let's give them some free ideas here tonight, Mikey, before we get into some of the Four Nations talk. Let's reinvent the Winnipeg Jets for the Winnipeg Jets. And let's see where you would like to go first with it.
Up front or defense first?
Let's go. Defense will be quick. Let's go D first.
So we looking everybody healthy, or are we gonna do just what we've got right now?
Let's go. Let's go what we have right now, and then just kind of give us an idea of where, because there's only 2 key pieces missing. Give us an idea where you'd slot those 2 guys in when healthy.
So on D, we're missing Samberg. That's the big hole, right? And the way that we've seen Morrissey and DeMello lately, I'd still like to give a look to Morrissey and Miller and let that, as a top pairing, just roll for a bit and see if we can find some footing there while DeMello plays with Heinola on that third pairing. Would be and until Samberg comes back, I think you keep rolling Fleury and Pionk just with reduced minutes.
Okay. No, I think that's fair. I think I look at this decor right now, and I don't think there's a real solution out there. So I'd be looking at the same thing you are, pretty much. Miller up with Morrissey to see if it can work. See if he can get a stretch here and just try and get DeMello back settled into his game. on the third pair, where I also have him with Ville Heinola. Again, Heinola is the type of D-man who can handle the puck touches, which could help DeMello just focus on settling in against lesser competition. Like that idea because it gives Heinola a look with a veteran defenseman who we know can defend when he finds it. And I do think going from a top pair to a third pair, that adjustment can be made. It also gives DeMello a puck-moving partner to let him focus on what he does best and settle in there. So I like the idea because it could bring back the best version of DeMello, and it gives Heinola a chance to see if he could actually impact this roster moving forward, which leaves Fleury/Stanley with Pionk. I don't think either left-handed D with Pionk will be a success. So if you want to roll those two, I'm fine with it at this stage.
I also don't hate the idea of giving Heinola and Pionk a look again, just because there was that stretch where they did play well together and they did have a layer of chemistry. And then it would give you a chance to do when Samberg is back. Give DeMello to Samberg for a few games and just see if we can find something that is working for DeMello, if that Heinola Pionk works as your like third pairing kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's interesting as well. Samberg, obviously, for me, jumps back into that top pair. Though, I'm more and more intrigued. And it's going to depend on... Yeah, no, you don't do it unless you get someone at the deadline. But yeah, no, I like that. I like that kind of idea. I would go back to Samberg, Pionk, just because it has excelled this year, and still give you either DeMello Heinola or Miller Heinola on the D. So we're pretty much on the same page on what to do with the defenseman. I think this is the spot where you need the big impact ad to really settle everybody down a peg lower. I still believe that to be true today, and just seeing what it's looked like without Samberg, I think further isolates that. Though it's not like the forwards are anywhere near perfect. Let's go over there. What are you thinking up front?
So this is where there is so many pieces that you could do something with, and so many ways of putting these ones together, right? And I've been so back and forth on this one. So I'm not going to go. I'm going to start with a line that I've wanted to see of Connor, Lowry, and Niederreiter. I'd move Niederreiter back to the right wing, and I'd have Connor on that wing with Lowry and Niederreiter as a second line, not as a third line. I want them playing second line minutes. Yep. So this is where I may take a little flack, and I'm willing to take it. I want to leave Mark Scheifele on the right wing.
Oh, wow.
I want, so I'm going to assume Ehlers is back. And I'm going to give Ehlers and Scheifele to Brad Lambert.
Interesting.
And then that would leave me with Perfetti playing with Nemestikov and Appleton. And I'm leaving our fourth line the same. I'm not touching that fourth line. They're great. They can stay together.
Interesting. Okay, so I want to hear more as to the theory with Lambert, with Ehlers and Scheifele, and then more about the third line, because you went somewhere that I wasn't thinking about. So that's what I'm just more curious on it.
So I've kind of for a while operated in the idea that I think Scheifele is just a better winger than he is a center at this point in his career. His body kind of hurts for whatever ailment is going on with him. We've talked, until we're blue in the face over the years about, maybe not the most defensive awareness. I just think, he's got a great shot. He skates well. I just think he works better as a winger, coming in that way as opposed to at center. And at this point in his career, I think you can get a lot more goals out of him, and playing him with Ehlers on the other wing operates in a way that I think you can work as a first line. Now, I know Brad Lambert is not a first line center in the NHL, but I think in a situation right now where I don't think we have an NHL like true 1C that can take you deep into the playoffs, that you have to roll like a couple, like 2 or 3 second lines. essentially. And I feel like Ehlers, Lambert, maybe. We don't know enough about him yet, but maybe in that spot, if not, go get trade for somebody at the deadline. With Scheifele on the other wing is a better setup for the Jets.
Interesting. I gotta say a couple concerns I would have. I still do think Scheifele has a few good years left as like a low end 1C, high end 2C, and the org just isn't in a spot with centers to mess around. Though I do think into his later career he is going to be a right wing. I think you do nail that. The other side of it too, I almost think you load up all your transition onto that one line, like Ehlers. And when Lambert's kind of settled in, I think that's what he's going to really bring. And I think we could use that a bit lower into the lineup. Is just my first thought. And I think what makes Ehlers and Scheifele work so well, even if Scheif isn't comfortable with it, is the fact that he has that transition support guy. So I do wonder about the fit of that. But, hey, I'm open to anything at this stage that's different. And it is interesting because you have the second line that I'm dying to see. Or one version of it. I'm going to do a little bit of a different version of this team coming up here. No, but interesting. It is interesting. That second line, I still believe Jordan really sold me on it last year. Could be a advanced version of that HBK line on Juice of from that cup win with the Pens, which was Kessel with Bonino and Hagelin. Yep. And you look at Lowry and Nino and Connor, and it's like, okay, those three are all better than that while being tough to play against. So I really like that idea. Just for difference sake, because I do like that line, I'm going to approach this a little bit differently. Obviously, Ehlers is still out for a week, maybe longer. I think it's well known. I would like to see Ehlers, Scheifele, Velarde. It's the one top line we've seen over a long enough stretch that's given this team elite first line minutes, and this roster needs its juice squeezed as much as possible. That would help provide it. Second and third line, I'm looking at trying to make two second lines, though I think the first one I mentioned will be the better of the two, but that's where I'm trying to get to. And what I'm trying to do with this is actually get one of Lowry and Nino with one of Perfetti and Lambert each. So I'm basically looking at this as the idea that Lowry, Connor, and Nino would be the second liners like you have going on, and guys like Perfetti and Lambert might be third liners, but I'm trying to get two third lines out of this. So I'm going to go from there, Connor, Lowry, Perfetti, with Perfetti on his off wing as a right winger.
Yep.
I think that gives you two defensively responsible players with Kyle Connor. It gives you two guys that play make in different ways. Cole Perfetti likes to slow the game down, let people come to him, draw people in, and find the open guy, which I think would fit beside a Kyle Connor, whereas Adam Lowry is the guy that's going to get in on the forecheck, disrupt things, and he's going to look for the high guy in the slot, which, again, I think would benefit Kyle Connor. Don't know if it'll work, and I think the Nino version is like the better option, but I'm trying to create three lines here that we can move around with here. Then Brad Lambert on his start. I think this is a big week and a half for the Winnipeg Jets. With Brad Lambert getting the call up, we've talked about it. This team needs to find ways to a higher ceiling, and that's what we're kind of trying to do here. Really liked his first period and some moments the rest of the game. Don't think it was necessarily the best game from him, but he pops off the page. Clearly has a certain skill set. And I do think being a top 2C for him this year is a big ask, but I don't think being a third line center is. So with my third line, I'm going to go Nino Niederreiter on the left side. I'm going to go Brad Lambert at center, and I'm going to go Vlad Nemestikov as the right winger. And the thought there is Vladdy and Nino could kind of insulate Lambert with the physicality side. I know Vlad gets beat up, but he's someone that gets into those corners. You still have Lambert who could skate through transition. You have him with Nino, who's a big body that could also produce 20-plus goals. Nino's a great net front guy, which I think would help work off of Lambert trying to get to the net. Don't know if it'll work, but just looking at what we have, I would potentially, instead of looking at a 2C, if this were to work, I might be looking at a bigger scoring winger to put on the right side of Nino and Lambert, which we know you were talking about this on one of the recent landing strips. Those are the type of assets that are ready like candy at the deadline compared to top end centers and top end right hand D. Yep. So I'm trying to see if we could get a 3C stack here, use Lowry a bit more offensive than trying to have him necessarily be that eraser, and seeing if instead of having to spend assets at center, maybe we have the centers in Winnipeg and we need to find the right wingers or add a winger for cheaper. Thinking of it from an asset management there. Also think it could kind of work. Now, if Perfetti doesn't work with Lowry and Connor, you can go the Nino route. And I did think Perfetti and Lambert had some interesting chemistry and some interesting looks there. Maybe you go find them a bigger scoring winger at the deadline, and that becomes a younger, kind of like the kid line we saw in New York on their Eastern Conference run. Yep. Maybe you could create some of that from that group on a third line. Get your meat and your top-end skill into the top six, have them as a change of pace third line, and then you have options like Kupari, Gus, Appleton, Vlad if you were to trade for a winger, Morgan Barron, whoever you decide at that point for your fourth line. I'd probably go, let's say, Kupari, Appleton, Iafallo, let's say.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, that's a line obviously you could trust. It's a line that could take tougher bottom sixes if you want to hide the Lambert line at times. I just think it creates more avenues for the Winnipeg Jets to score throughout their lineup, to defend throughout their lineup, and not get hemmed in as much. Is kind of the thought process I have there. What's your rebuttals or counters to what I've kind of put together?
So I really like the idea of going Connor, Lowry, Nino on that kind of like all gas, no brakes, and then getting a big winger for Perfetti and Lambert, because that would be a sneaky third line that you could throw out at other teams that they're going to have to deal with all night and just be fucking driven nuts at. That would be a lot of fun. I like that as an idea.
And it's one of those things because right now, obviously, the Winnipeg Jets look at a lineup like the top six, it has to be all skill. The Lowry line's the quote-unquote third line, and then the fourth line, you're looking for what they've gotten from their fourth line so far this year. But what if you looked at it like a top nine, and what if Adam Lowry is good enough to be a 2C that could help drive some offense? And what if you're almost underselling your own talent by playing it the way it is? I want to see the Winnipeg Jets try something bold like this. No guarantees it works, but guess what? We know where the other route takes us. Yeah. And it's not going to be where we want to go.
I feel like we've been harping at a quote unquote top nine for years and years and years. And we need to get to that level of thinking, or at minimum stop viewing Adam Lowry as a third line quote unquote center. They need to start using him in that kind of offensive top six way. He can do it. He can support a line that does it and still be, defensively sound. We need to get to that point because that's how the Jets are going to be their most successful version.
It is, and obviously, I'm not convinced we'll ever see it. I know you laughed at me when I even brought up the idea before getting on this podcast today, but these are the types of conversations and the types of avenues this organization is only failing themselves by not trying.
And like, if you're Kevin Cheveldayoff, you have assembled this group of players together through draft, through free agency, through trade. You've put all this time and effort in to bring a collection of players that do work well together. We've seen it. We have the evidence. We know that it works. And to have it continually just, in my opinion, misused and misplayed, it has to be frustrating from a management standpoint, you would think.
You would think, unless management's quite happy with certain players playing together. From things I've been told, Kevin Cheveldayoff is very much behind the Connor and Scheifele stuff. So I'm not sure he sees it necessarily the same way. But maybe he could open his eyes a little bit on what this team he's assembled can potentially be. Speaking of assembling teams, let's end off with some Four Nations talk. Obviously, the rosters were announced today, though we got a leak of the Canada one yesterday. Josh Morrissey, the lone Winnipeg Jet on Team Canada, meaning Adam Lowry and Mark Scheifele are out. Hellebuck and Connor are in, unsurprisingly for Team USA, with Neil Pionk being out. Is Mikey surprised by any of the Jets-related roster, or even just any of the rosters in general? What kind of stood out to you?
So from a Jets standpoint, not surprised. Josh Morrissey absolutely deserves to be on Team Canada. We talked about maybe Adam Lowry getting a spot on that fourth line at the start of the season when the start was so hot, but I think just them being played so heavily and getting so tired, I think it burned out. And Mark Scheifele, whatever that injury is, I think is what kept him off of Team Canada. So no, I'm not actually surprised by the Lowry and Scheifele snubs or whatever you want to call them. Kind of saw those coming. And yeah, Connor Hellebuck, no question. Kyle Connor, no question. Neil Pionk, again, everybody is pretty enamored with the points. But I don't think the overall play is there for him to make it ahead of the guys that are on that team. Just a quick scan of that group. I'm probably taking everybody on that group over Neil Pionk. So for the most part, so no, not a big shock on those two. The only little overall surprise, nice little nugget for me is my boy Patrick Laine making a Team Finland. He just came back, scored a power play goal on his return. It's nice to see Laine back, and that he'll be with Team Finland. So.
Yeah, your boy Sam Montembeault gets in too.
That's right. Thank you. I think I called that at the beginning of the year, and everybody laughed at me.
Yeah, he ends up sneaking on. I gotta say, I did think Logan Thompson was getting on over Sam Montembeault based on the last month of the season here, so that one did surprise me a little bit. Yeah. When it comes to the Jets, not surprised. I had kind of been on the Adam Lowry might have a better case than Mark Scheifele angle outside of the Florida game, where I said if Scheifele plays like that the rest of the way, I could see him getting in. And then we're talking about just how quiet that top line's been, so shouldn't be a surprise. The other aspect that I think really hurt Mark Scheifele's case with what the team was looking for, and it's why I thought Lowry would have a better case. Look at that bottom six and how it's assembled. Yeah. They were looking for certain skill sets, and having an additional forward that could help you out on the power play was never going to be a problem for Team Canada. And I do think Seth Jarvis is a better number 13. Pretty cool for the Winnipegger to get on that team. A little bit of youth before the Olympics with that Jarvis pick. Yep. Obviously pumped for Morrissey. Hellebuck, no surprise. Kyle Connor, no surprise. And sorry to Bill from Transcona, but Neil Pionk was never a realistic option. Just look at that team for Team Canada or Team USA. Those 7D are good.
Stacked. I am terrified for Team Canada. That Team USA team has a lot of my favorite players on it, unfortunately. So I may be joining you in that Team USA jersey this year. We'll see.
On Team Canada, surprised by Parayko and Sanheim, with guys like Uyghur and Bouchard being left out. I figured they'd take one of the two, but to get both in there was surprising. And
yeah, Sanheim was a surprising one.
Yeah, I mean, Sanheim right now, where you probably wish you did the whole Barlow and Schmidt thing for him 2 summers ago, don't you?
I forgot about that, yeah.
I could never forget such a thing. I'm
trying.
It should be a fun tournament. I think obviously cool for Patty Laine, who scores last night too. Great to see. That ovation in Montreal was awesome for him. Definitely warmed my heart. Still, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm smiling about it still. But that Finland team, the worst of the 4 by a mile.
Oh, for sure. No question.
Can I give you a hot take?
Yes, please.
USA over Sweden in the finals.
I was just going to ask what your finals. Over Sweden, not even Canada there.
US over Sweden in the finals.
US over Sweden. What? So which part of Canada gives you the most amount of concern? Is it goal?
The goaltending. It's the goaltending just terrifies me, man. And I know a goalie could get hot, but I'm just looking at that team. I'm also one. I liked the role players that did take, like guys like Sorelli and Hagel. Like Hagel's been a monster this year, and they're the type of shutdown guys that could actually play with pace. And obviously, what's his name? Cooper is familiar with them out in Tampa, so I guess he'll know how to use them. But yeah, the goaltending is just such a big thing for me. I also do wonder about the decor, and like I think there's some utility in Colton Parayko, and he's going to be a guy. I know I sold myself on him a bit last year with the Jets. Watching this week, I do think his contract aside, I do think he does bring some things that are necessary and needed, and I would be intrigued by the fit beside Morrissey. Maybe we'll get a look at that at the tournament. I really like the look of Sweden, and maybe it's just like cheering for the underdog there. And I just think U.S. doesn't have a hole in their roster. I mean, the one snub I think is Tage Thompson for who's the older guy they ended up taking, Trocheck. But that roster looks really good to me, and then they have the number one goalie in the world. So
yeah, they've got the number one goalie in the world, and the top four is just ridiculous. Like that D is just stupid.
Here, I'll let's get the hot takes going here. They have the number one goalie in the world in Team USA.
Yep.
Canada has the number one center, obviously. Team USA has the number one defenseman. How's that?
Quinn Hughes?
Quinn Hughes.
Yeah, no question. I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, okay. I thought that might have been hot. I thought I might have got a Makar pushback, but
we'll probably get a bunch of hate for it. But I think Quinn Hughes is, I think he's the best defenseman.
I think he's come there the way he's come. Also, I do find it interesting. Evan Bouchard obviously gets left off this roster, and a lot of that probably being some of the social media clips and some of the narrative around him. You want to see a really interesting stat profile? Go to Natural Stat Trick, the line tool there, where you could search Wowies up. Search up how well Bouchard's done without McDavid and Draisaitl, and then go do the same with Cal Makar without Nathan McKinnon, and let me know what you think. Give me a text later, and let me know what you think. I think it'll surprise you.
I'm excited.
Considering how the public narratives are, I think it's gonna surprise you.
Interesting. That's a good little Easter egg to check out.
Yeah. And hey, you don't even have to do it for just this 20 games or whatever this year.
Yep.
Add last season to it. Make it even more interesting.
Interesting. I'm excited to see.
It's I think Quinn Hughes is the guy in the league right now. I really do. Quinn Norris.
I do too. We've been our good friend there, Carson. We've been talking about Quinn Hughes for a while now, and it just he's grown into that spot so well. The Canucks have a hell of a player, and Team USA does as well. I'm so curious, like what has happened to Canadian goaltending? How are we at a point now where that is easily the weakest and like most shaky, concerning point on a Team Canada team? That's like unheard of, historically. That has always been the rock, the spot where you go, well, that's, you never have to worry about that. And now we're wondering if Jordan Binnington is going to show up, if they're going to have to roll out Aiden Hill, Sam Montembeault. Like what is happening to Canadian goaltending?
Okay, I have a few thoughts on this from personal experience, and then I've been listening to, I want to say it was Kevin Woodley shared some thoughts on this as well. I was talking to a goalie today about it, and just how bad Canada's goaltending options are. Like on the 32 Thoughts podcast, who is it now? I can't even remember his name. Frege is with, what's his name, Bukakis, and they had Dave Amber on. And Dave Amber and Bukakis had 6 different names potentially being on Team Canada and net. Like, you shouldn't have that big of a potential list for the best tournament, and it's because you don't have the talent. So when I think about it, and the problem is I don't know the experience of other countries, but thinking about when I grew up and also when I've been coaching in recent years, like last year I was coaching a 11 and 12-year-old AA team. And I think there's a real problem in Canada with coaching in general, but even more so when it comes to goalie coaches. And there's just not enough or people that don't understand the position. Like, I know for our tryout camp, I was the one pulling goalies aside and talking to them about drills and trying to do specialized work with them. And I know fuck all about developing a goaltender. So I do think we leave our goalies in a real bad spot where they come to practice and they're expected to just practice within the confines of what helps the D and forwards. And I don't think you see goalies really get specialized help unless their parents are paying for it in the summer, or you get to like AAA hockey at 13, 14, which is already pretty like old in development when you look at things like that. I also think there's a pretty negative connotation, especially with parents, on becoming a goaltender. It's like the one thing I remember hearing all the time is like when you want to try a goalie, you could try it, but it's not going to be a fucking regular thing and whatnot. And I know at one point my middle brother had considered being a goalie, and my parents were not having it, partially due to the cost, but it's also like the pressure and the mental aspect of everything seems to fall on you.
Interesting.
So those are some of my thoughts just in my own personal experience on how goaltending is perceived. I know Kevin Woodley was on a podcast I was listening to recently talking about this topic, and he's been talking to goaltending coaches or specialty development coaches in Canada and trying to get their takes on what's going on. Mm-hmm. And it seems like partially what I'm talking about as far as not having the specialized teachers at a young age, but they were saying that even at the Hockey Canada level, the programming they offer goalie development coaches is so behind the times of where goaltending has gone that Woodley's talked to multiple coaches that are high up in the Canada system that have gone down to take the American courses to try and understand modern day goaltending better. So it's clearly something Canada hasn't invested into at any level.
So yeah, it's been such a long time that since they've made it a priority that we've lost the knowledge and the drive for it at the grassroots level. And if you don't have it there, you're never going to develop it later on. You're just going to have a lot of guys just kind of getting by. That's tough. That's really tough because when you get to these best on best tournaments, it's become a spot where they're a step behind the other countries.
It's also interesting because we seem to, and it's been so long, like Carey Price would be the last one, obviously. Yep. We seem to overvalue and put a lot of pressure on the kids that do end up making the World Juniors. Like Carter Hart was going to be the next Carey Price, and I know some legal issues kind of got in the way there, but it wasn't like he was looking like Carey Price. He was looking like a pretty good NHL goalie, but not that. Devin Levi was the next big thing, and he's been the next big thing in the AHL because he gets lit up in the NHL. So I think it's been a big collection of it going talked about, under specialized in Canada for so long, as well as just like not having the actual physical tools to properly develop goalies at a young age.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, man. Hey, we've been talking for a while. This was a fun one. I think we're good to leave it off there. What do you think?
I think so.
All right, so thank you for tuning in. Sorry about the landing strip last night. Hope this makes up for it as we dive into where the Winnipeg Jets are. And we'll be back live. If you're listening to this Thursday morning, we'll be back live tonight, Thursday, after who are they playing here? I don't have the schedule up. It's Buffalo in Buffalo.
Yep.
And Buffalo's coming off a game where they allowed 5 unanswered to end up losing. So I don't think that's going to be an easy one on Thursday.
No, they're going to be mad about that one. So make sure you join us after the game, and we'll break it all down for you, and hopefully get to hear that sack Squirtle sing us a victory.
God, I'm missing her. Right on.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
This has been a Top Line Media production.